One of the hardest things when running a business is to know how much equity or capital to keep in your business at any given time. But not only is it important for your day-to-day operations, it's crucial when it comes time to sell your business to prospective buyers. If you're a serial entrepreneur who frequently buys and sells businesses, you do not want to miss today's guest, who is going to tell you the 12 things you absolutely must know before buying or selling a business.
Welcome to this edition of Peak Performance Podcast with your host, Thor Conklin. Thor will be sharing the necessary tools, strategies, and psychology you'll need to become a peak performer in any area of your life or business.
Thor Conklin here. We give you the tricks, the tips, the tools, the strategy, the technology, and the psychology peak performers use in order to get more done and execute at the highest level. If you know what to do but struggle with getting it all done, or simply want to raise your game to the next level, this podcast is for you. Sit back and enjoy.
Today's guest is David Barnett, author of 3 best-selling books on Amazon, as well as Business Evaluation Extraordinaire. David specializes in working with business owners to increase the value of their business before selling them to prospective buyers. If you want to add value to your business, then David's the guy you go to.
David, thank you for joining us today. I know the audience is going to get so much out of today's episode. You know, one of the things I saw in your bio that I absolutely loved is you figured out that it took you 10 years to unlearn what you learned in B school. Expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. You know, I was there probably for about 3 years before I realized that business school isn't about turning people into businessmen, or business people. It's about turning you into a Fortune 500, so you can be one of the cogs of a giant machine. And by the time I realized I was almost done, but really the training they do in business school is they teach you how these big corporations run, and you do case studies about if the big mega corporation should do an international expansion and all that kind of jazz. And when you get out into the real world and you figure you're going to start a business or you're going to buy a business or you're going to run a business, you quickly realize that small businesses and family-run businesses are not really much at all like those big giant enterprises. And so I had to really learn a lot from the people I was doing business with along the way. The biggest place I learned, of course, is, I graduated towards the end of the 90s. And back in those days, the Yellow Pages was still a really relevant media. If you typed plumber into Google in those days, you'd get some guy in California. They hadn't figured out how to do local searching. So Yellow Pages was really important to local small businesses. And I worked for one of those publishers for about 7 years, and I went out and I met with the owners and managers of local small businesses. And it was a great place to learn a lot about how real actual business is actually done.
And I'm sure there were a lot of things that did not make sense and weren't transferable to the small businesses. But was there anything in B school that you walked away and said, you know what, this is actually applicable to small businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. In particular, when you go to business school, they teach you the strategy stuff, but you also pick up some vocational training sort of along the way, things like how accounting is supposed to work and how to read financial statements. And one of the things that I actually really took out of business school that I found is really lacking in the world of small business is that whole finance profession.
Yes.
That whole understanding of capital and needing to deploy your capital in a smart way. I run into, for instance, all kinds of small and medium-sized businesses that have way too much equity in them. And of course, small business owners, they think, I don't want to have debts because I don't want to have to pay, interest and things like this. And what they end up doing is they invest far too much of their own personal net wealth into a business that doesn't give them an adequate rate of return for the risk that they take by being invested in that particular asset. And just thinking about their business as an asset amongst a portfolio that's that kind of area I find small business people really lack. And of course, get back into the whole Michael Gerber E-Myth thing. It's because so many of these people are technicians. They're not really entrepreneurs or business people.
Yeah, it is so important to get a base of a financial understanding. Without it, you're just playing with disaster. The number of people that I come across that are still doing cash accounting and running their business, they have no idea what their liabilities are.
Yeah, and people who are still using old-fashioned shortcuts, I'll call them, to manage their cash flow. Like I actually ran across a client the other day where they're processing checks So in their accounting system, it looks as though they've written a check to someone, and they really have, but then they hold it and they don't mail it until there's enough money in the account. And so the financial statements that they produce tell a much different story than the actual position of the company in any given point in time. And it has to do with, sort of lazy old crutches that people have used in the past with antiquated systems of managing businesses, where today with computers and accounting systems that we can have, small businesses can really have an accurate snapshot of what's going on in business with quickly reconciled statements. And you can, I teach some of my clients how to use their financial statements every month to actually manage the business. And surprisingly, a lot of these small business guys, they have never used them in that way. They just think it's a tax thing. I got to get my financials done so that I can do my tax returns at the end of the year. And I find, for instance, people won't have their chart of accounts set up properly. I was working with a client a few weeks ago, and they knew that they had a problem somewhere in their business, but they didn't know where the problem was. And their chart of accounts was all mixed up. They had a bunch of stuff just kind of lumped into the cost of goods, and they had things that should have been in the cost of goods in their overhead expenses further down the income statement. And when we got everything sorted out so that we could match revenue streams to cost centers, we realized that a couple of their lines of business were actually money losers.
Yeah.
And these were things that they were pushing.
Yeah.
So every time they made a new sale and brought a new customer on board, they were actually hurting themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
because he wasn't sorted out properly in his accounting, he couldn't even know what was going on in his own business.
Yeah,
I
it's
see that
amazing.
kind of thing
Yeah, absolutely.
all
And
the
people
time,
look at their
unfortunately.
they look at their P&L and go, "Okay, I'm making money or I'm not making money." It's like that's just one piece of it. We could go on for an hour just talking about financials, but I think we'll lose just about every single listener because their eyes are going to glaze over. But here's the bottom line.
Thor, it's exciting.
Exactly.
Right.
Hey, you know what? It is exciting to me. I track. No, I'm serious. I mean, one of the things that I do is I have my accounting set up where the first thing that comes out of the account is my profit. I don't pay expenses first. I pay my profit first. I do it backwards. Revenue in minus profits equals how much money I have left over to run the business. You do that, and it gets exciting because each week, each month, you see it keep going up. I keep my net worth. I track it on a monthly basis. Was it fun to do in the beginning? No, but when you start seeing those numbers go up, then it gets fun. Anyway.
It's funny because I do the same thing personally.
Yeah.
I use an idea called an artificial environment of scarcity.
Yes.
Where, in my own business, I pay myself a salary. So every 2 weeks I take the same money out and I force myself to run my household on that money.
Yep.
And then what I do is I figure out how much of it I need, and then I take part of it away into savings. And, it's a one-way street, right? It never comes back.
Yep.
And then I put myself in this situation where, at the end of the 2 weeks, I might be short on cash, and it forces me to say, you know what, no, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to buy that. And of course, cumulatively over the years, what it does, this, is that savings account ends up being huge.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it puts you in a great position as far as net worth.
Yeah, if you listen to nothing else in this episode and you want to know the truth of becoming wealthy, follow this. Pay yourself first, put that stuff aside, and use that for your investment. And people don't do it. I see it all the time. People making huge dollars in their business, and then what they do is they run it back into let's just throw it back in there. Let's use it as capital growth. So anyway, learn how to read your financials. It's so important. If you were a pilot, you'd have to know what the gauges of the plane are all about. Otherwise, you could end up crashing. And in business, your financial statements are like that dashboard on the airplane. Understand what the dials mean. It was fascinating because you had set up a company, Advantage Liquidity Partners, providing liquidity to small businesses in 2006. 2 years later, we just come into a tremendous roadblock in our economy. What happened in 2008? How'd the business survive? What did you do?
Oh, it caught on fire and burned to the ground. So in 2006, I started a commercial debt brokerage called ALP. And that corporation, by the way, is still the corporation I'm doing business with today. So, and one of the things I teach people is that there's a difference between corporations and businesses, right? So corporations come in and out of different businesses. And so I started up ALP as a commercial debt brokerage. I was doing factoring facilities, arranging bank loans, commercial mortgages, capital and operating leases for equipment. And I was doing a lot of business with the B grade lenders. And I was able to actually create a situation where a lot of the Main Street banks were actually referring people to me because, if you're a small business person, you go into a Main Street bank and you've got all of your business there. If they can't do the loan that you want them to do, what'll happen is if you go across the street to the competing bank and they say yes, the competing bank will then try to steal all the other business, right? Retirement accounts, car loans, mortgages, all that stuff. So I would go to commercial bankers and I would say, look, if you can't do the loan, send the person to me, because what I'll do is I'll hook them up with a leasing company or something, and all that other business you have will be safe. And so it was very successful. I was getting all kinds of referrals from bankers who wanted their clients to be helped out but didn't want them to go to a competing bank. And in 2000, at the end of 2007, early 2008, half of the sources of capital that I was dealing with went under, and my entire deal pipeline just sort of dried up. One of the things, though, that I noticed when I was doing those financing deals is more and more people were coming to me looking for acquisition financing to buy businesses that were for sale. And the people that were putting the deals together had absolutely no idea what they were doing. I used to get phone calls from bankers saying, hey, Dave, I've got a client that needs your help. They have a contract here. It's a home purchase agreement. Except it's being used, the contract that is being used to purchase a convenience store, and it says that they're going to get 95% financing within 10 days for this business. And of course, businesses aren't bought like that. That's how you buy a house. But what happened was some business owner got hooked up somehow with a real estate agent who was trying to sell the business and had no idea what they were doing. And I realized that there were so many of these people out there trying to play at buying and selling businesses who really had no idea what they were doing. And I was the one who ended up having to redo the deals, and I was only earning the commissions for being the finance guy. And so when the deal pipeline dried up for financing, I decided that the thing for me to do was get into business brokerage because I saw there was a need. And so I joined an international franchise brand in the business brokerage world because they had access to the training and development. And, we don't know what we don't know. But when you have a little bit of knowledge, you become very aware of how ignorant you might be in a certain field of study. And I knew that if I was going to do a full-time gig helping people buy and sell businesses, that I certainly needed to learn more. And so I actually was one of the first people in my area to actually obtain a professional certification in buying and selling businesses. And then I started starting at the very end of 2008.
And I know that you wrote a book about the 12 things you should know before selling your business. What are some of those?
Yeah, basically, you need to know what to expect in the process, and you need to know what kinds of terms and conditions businesses are sold under, and you need to know what your business is worth. Some of the most common mistakes that people make is they price their business the way they would price a home or a piece of fine art. They put a price on it figuring that a buyer will come along and negotiate them down, and whatever someone's willing to pay is what it's worth, and that's simply not the case, Thor. Businesses are worth a value that is a function of their cash flow versus the risk associated with that industry. And if you have a buyer that comes along who doesn't understand that and they agree to pay a ridiculously high price for your business, it's never going to close, because by the time they meet up with accountants and bankers and lawyers and all those other people, they will become educated that the price they have agreed to pay is dumb. And so if you price it wrong, you actually avoid meeting the people who you want to meet, because the people who you want to meet are the people who are what I call the reasonable buyers. They have good credit, they have savings, they have resources, they have the ability to manage your business. They may even have industry experience. And they've been doing their research, and they know what businesses like any subject business is going for. So, if they're looking for a machine shop, they know what machine shops sell for. And if they see yours for sale for double what it should be selling for, they go, wow, that person's nuts. I can't deal with them. So you never meet them. Whereas if the business is priced right, you get to meet the reasonable buyers who are actually the ones who can do a deal. And when it comes to selling a private business, one of the biggest concerns often for the seller is the timeline of the deal. 4 of the 5 biggest reasons that businesses go up for sale are not planned for. Everyone thinks about retirement, but small businesses go up for sale because of poor health, the need to relocate, divorce, burnout, fatigue, all kinds of reasons. And when someone decides that they need to sell the business, they typically need it to be sold as soon as possible, because by that time their situation is causing the value of the business to erode.
That makes sense. Thank you so much for listening today. I really do appreciate your time, and I hope you found today's show valuable. If you would like to receive these shows automatically to your phone or to your computer, simply go to iTunes and subscribe. After listening to several of the shows, if you're so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating, as this helps us reach additional people and spread the message. If you're truly committed to taking your life to the next level and doing whatever it takes to become a peak performer, but something's holding you back, something is blocking your way, and you just can't seem to figure out what it is, send me an email to info@thorconklin.com, and I'd be more than happy to get on the phone with you. We'll schedule a 15-minute discovery call. No obligation, no cost. I absolutely love to hear from the listeners, and if there's something I can do to help, I'd be more than happy to do that. Also, if you found something of great interest in today's show and you want to share that with your friends and family, simply go to my Facebook page, Thor Conklin, click on the episode, hit the share button, and share it on your page. You can follow me at Twitter at Thor Conklin. The website is thorconklin.com. We're constantly adding new free resources, discussing additional tricks, tips, tools, and strategies on how to be a peak performer. Remember, I try to keep these episodes short so you can listen to them during dot time, doing other things, commuting, driving, walking, working out. Decide to be a peak performer in all that you do. And until tomorrow, have an absolutely amazing day.
Be on the lookout for part 2 of Thor's interview with David, where he tells you the most common mistakes that buyers make and how you can avoid them. See you next time on Peak Performers Podcast.